desert stretched endlessly, a golden sea beneath the fading sun. Heat shimmered off the rocks and the air carried the dry scent of dust and sage. Somewhere amid the silence, a faint rasping sound broke through, the strained breath of a woman fighting against death itself. Claradine hung by her wrists from a weathered post driven deep into the hard earth. The ropes cut cruelly into her skin, and every small movement sent waves of pain through her body. Her dress, once white, was torn and stained with dirt and blood. The men who had left her there hadn't bothered to glance back. They were confident the desert would finish what they started. Her throat burned from thirst, her lips cracked and bleeding. She tried to lift her head, but the effort made her vision swim. Her mind drifted between flashes of the last few hours, the laughter of the men, the snap of the rope tightening around her wrists, the jeering voice saying she'd learn her place. She had begged them to spare her father, but they'd already gone after him. They said she'd be a message to anyone who thought to cross them again. Now the message was written in her suffering. The sun sank lower, and the shadows of circling vultures grew longer over the sand. Each flap of their wings sent a chill through her fevered mind. She whispered something that might have been a prayer, or maybe a plea to anyone who might still care. Her tongue felt thick, her body heavy as lead. She slumped against the post, eyes half closed. It would be so easy to let go. Miles away, the rhythmic thud of hooves broke the silence. Luke Carver rode along the dry ridge, reins loose in his hand, his eyes scanning the ground for lost cattle. He'd been out since dawn, chasing tracks that disappeared in the arroyo. The day had been long, the heat relentless, and he was thinking more about water than anything else when something caught his eye, a trail of wagon ruts cutting deep into the sand. They didn't belong here. No one passed this way unless they were running from something. He followed the tracks down the ridge, his instincts prickling. He noticed spent shells glinting in the dirt and the faint smell of burnt powder. Then, through the haze of heat, he saw movement, something that didn't belong to the wind. He drew his rifle and nudged his horse forward. As he came closer, the sight struck him hard. A woman bound to a post, her body limp but not lifeless. He swung down from his saddle before the horse even stopped moving, the rifle falling from his grip. "Hell!" he muttered under his breath, his heart pounding as he ran toward her. Her head hung low, strands of hair clinging to her dusty cheeks. He could see the pulse faintly fluttering in her throat. She was alive. Barely. Luke drew his knife and began sawing through the thick ropes. The fibers bit into his hands and the sweat stung his eyes. When the final strand gave way, she collapsed forward, but he caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was hot, feverish, her breathing shallow. He laid her gently in the shade of his horse, propping her head against his arm. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly. Her eyelids fluttered and a faint sound escaped her cracked lips. "Don't let them come back," she whispered. Luke glanced around, scanning the open land. The wagon tracks led east, away from the setting sun. Whoever had done this was still out there not far. His gut twisted. He'd seen cruelty before. Bandits, rustlers, men who thought life was cheap. But this felt different. This was deliberate. He took the canteen from his saddle and poured a thin stream of water over her lips. She swallowed weakly, eyes flickering open just enough for him to see they were green as new spring grass. There was fear in them, and something else. An unspoken story. "Easy," he murmured. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure it was true. The last light of day faded into red and violet. Luke worked quickly, tearing strips from his bandana to bind her wrists where the rope had cut deep. As he lifted her to the saddle, he caught sight of something on her forearm, a faint scar, circular, marked like a brand. He froze. The symbol was burned deep into his memory, a coiled snake around a cross. It was the mark of the Black Mesa Gang. His breath caught, and his hands trembled as he secured her across the saddle. The gang had taken everything from him, his brother, his ranch, his peace. For years he'd hunted them in silence, driven by vengeance. And now somehow one of their own was here, left to die in the same dirt they'd ruled over. But looking at her, barely alive, he couldn't believe she was one of them. Her face was too young, too broken by pain and terror. Maybe she'd tried to leave them. Maybe that was why they'd done this. He mounted behind her, wrapping one arm around to steady her limp body. His horse snorted and pawed at the sand, eager to move. Luke looked once more at the empty desert, the vultures circling higher, the wind shifting as if carrying whispers of the past. Then he turned his horse north toward the distant outline of his ranch. He didn't know who she really was, but one thing was certain. Someone would come looking for her. And when they did, the desert would once again taste blood. Morning broke pale and cold across the Carver Ranch. The wind carried the faint smell of rain from far off, though the sky was still clear. Inside the cabin, a small fire crackled in the stove, casting soft light over rough-hewn walls and worn furniture. Luke Carver sat at the table, his hat resting beside him, his rifle leaning against the doorframe. His eyes were fixed on the woman sleeping on the cot near the fire. She hadn't stirred much since he brought her in, but the color had returned to her cheeks. He'd cleaned her wounds, dressed the cuts on her wrists, and given her water until she could swallow without choking. She looked peaceful now, but Luke knew peace rarely lasted long in these lands. When she finally woke, her breathing changed first, shallow, becoming steady. Her lashes flickered, and her green eyes opened to the dim light. For a long moment, she just stared at the ceiling as if unsure where she was. Then she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of weathered wood, and she tensed. Her voice came out hoarse and trembling. "You saved me." Luke nodded once. "Found you near the gulch. Thought you were dead." She swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have stopped." That caught him off guard. He frowned, leaning forward. "What's that supposed to mean?" Her gaze fell to her bound wrists, now wrapped in strips of cloth. "The men who left me there, they don't like unfinished business. If they find me here, they'll kill you too." Luke stood and crossed to the window, peering through the slats toward the empty plains. "Let 'em try," he muttered. He'd faced worse, but the unease in his chest grew heavier. He turned back to her and saw it again. The faint scar burned into her skin, the mark that had haunted him for years. He nodded toward it. "That brand, I know it." Her eyes widened and she pulled her arm under the blanket as if to hide it. "I didn't choose it," she whispered. "They did it to me. Said it would make me one of them. Said I didn't belong anywhere else." Luke's jaw clenched. Black Mesa Gang. She flinched at the name. He took a step closer, his voice quiet but sharp. "Those men killed my brother, burned my barn to the ground. I've been hunting their trail ever since. So you tell me, girl, why shouldn't I send you right back to them?" Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When she did, her words came soft but strong. "Because I ran from them. I tried to warn the sheriff what they were planning, but they caught me before I could. They thought I'd told. That's why they left me out there. They said the desert would finish me." Luke studied her, his mind caught between anger and something like pity. She looked too fragile to lie, yet he'd seen deception in prettier faces before. The fire popped in the stove and the sound broke his thoughts. He walked to the table, picked up his coffee, and took a long drink, trying to think past the ache of old memories. Outside, the horses stirred restlessly. He heard their hooves shift in the dirt. A soft snort that made him glance toward the window again. Dust was rising on the horizon, a faint brown cloud growing fast. His stomach dropped. Riders. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. Clara pushed herself up, wincing. "They're coming, aren't they?" He didn't answer, just looked back at her. "You know who it is." She nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "If it's them, you have to let me go. If they see me here, they'll burn this place to the ground. You don't have to die for me." Luke shook his head, loading a round into the chamber with a steady click. "I've got no intention of dying." He glanced toward the horizon, eyes narrowing against the glare. "But I'm done letting men like that take what they want." She slid off the cot, weak but determined. You don't even know me, she whispered. He looked at her, his face hard but his voice softer. Maybe not, but I know what being left to die feels like. The first echo of hooves thundered closer, bouncing off the distant rocks. Luke crouched near the window, aiming the rifle toward the dust. 3 riders, maybe 4. They were coming fast and they weren't hiding their intent. Clara pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. She could see their shapes now, broad hats, rifles slung across their backs, the cruel swagger of men who thought they owned the desert. The lead rider shouted something she couldn't hear over the wind, but she knew that voice. Her breath caught in her throat. "Oh God," she whispered, stepping toward the window. Luke's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay back." But she didn't move. The riders drew closer until she could see their faces through the dust.